Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome to the show for his first time Representative Chris Morrow, who represents the Windham-Windsor-Bennington district. And for those who don't know, it's Weston, the towns of Weston, Andover, Londonderry, and Windhall. So glad you're here, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's quite a mouthful, Windham, Windsor, Bennington as a district. What's that like serving three counties, which I'm sure they each have their own sort of flavor and feel? And then, of course, you've got the towns within those
Ye-
counties.
Yeah. I think I win the award for the longest district name in the legislature. It's a little odd. It's more, I just base it mostly on the towns themselves. The
Mhm.
counties, as you know, in Vermont, there's not strong county governance or anything like that. So, especially here, we're on the fringes of all three counties.
Mhm.
Um, and so, we feel like we're our own little world tucked up here in the mountains. So the county issue was more of an issue while I was campaigning,
Mm.
and from a kind of organizational point of view, because each county has their own democratic committee and things like that. So I was interacting with three different county chairs and all that sort of thing. But from an actual governance point of view, it's much more just the towns and the district, and we're pretty cohesive. Although they did redistrict it in 2020, and so it's a little less intuitive now than it was before then.
Mhm.
Um, but as you said, it's Andover, Weston, Londonderry, and Windhall, and um, so it's we're all mountain towns. Andover is a lot smaller and more isolated than the other towns, but um, a lot of second homeowners, a lot of rural poverty, and this interesting mix of wealth and poverty and rurality, and of course, like the rest of the state, an aging population. You
Mhm.
know,
And what about issues? Were there some issues that were more important in one town over another, or?
Not particularly. I mean, the clean heat standard chaos from the last election cycle, which was largely based on misinformation
Mhm.
around how much oil prices were going to go up. That came up in a couple of towns more than others. Um, and while we were doing the education bill, Andover is in a separate SU than the other three towns.
Oh, okay.
Um, so there was some difference there. Um, and they're not as independent school oriented there. And the other three towns are heavily oriented towards independent school choice,
Mhm.
because of the historic Burton as our historic academy.
Right.
And then Wynn Hall only has an independent K through 6 school. Um, so there's, that whole issue is very top of mind in this district.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. Now, if I remember correctly, Andover is actually in the same SU as like Chester.
Correct.
So
Right.
kind of going that way. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. And just for listeners' sake and also my sake, if I remember correctly, one of the larger employers in your area is Okemo, correct?
Yeah, that's over in Ludlow.
Oh, Ludlow.
So
I'm so sorry. I'm getting Londonderry and Ludlow confused. That's my bad.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably some folks over here that work over there, but that's mostly over Ludlow Way. In Winhall, a lot of people work at Stratton
Stratton.
because that includes, yeah, Winhall includes Bonneville and a bunch of Stratton. It's really
Mhm.
a lot going on for Stratton. Um, so, but a lot of the second homeowners up here are tied to skiing.
Mhm.
Um, so the ski economy is important. Bromley, of course, is nearby, as is Magic Mountain, which is in Londonderry,
Right.
much smaller mountain, but well beloved by the locals, especially. Um, yeah, so this whole ski economy is important for sure.
Hmm. Yes, and thank you for straightening me out between Stratton and Okemo. I should know that.
Yeah,
Having
well,
grown
if you
up
don't
around
get
Mountain
over here
Snow.
that often, it's easy to confuse them.
That's very generous of you. Um, and as a new lawmaker, with this being your first session, what has been your major takeaways so far?
Wow. Well, it's a big learning curve. It's very different than running a business. I ran the North Shire bookstores in Manchester and Saratoga Springs for decades. My parents started them. So my orientation was definitely from a business point of view,
Hmm.
although my educational background is all environmental policy stuff. Um, but so my biggest takeaway, probably, well, I have two, I
You can have
think.
as many as you want.
um, One is that thankfully, as opposed to many other states and certainly the federal government, it's still a relatively collegial atmosphere.
Mhm.
And especially the freshman group, there's 50 freshman legislators in the House this year. That's a third of the group, third of the House. So it was a strong freshman class, and we made a concerted effort to um, be bipartisan and get to know folks from the other parties and to spend time together. Of course, we didn't always vote together, but we often would dine together and make an effort to talk about issues across party lines. And I think overall it was a much more centrist group than the existing members. So which I think Vermonters wanted, and I think will over time, as we settle in, have an impact on the legislature. Um, but almost everyone there, even if the people I disagree with the most are there for the right reasons in terms of they're representing their constituents the way they think best, and they care about Vermont and doing what's right for Vermont. And so that was heartening for me because I mean I was hoping that would be the case, but you never know, right? And so lots of policy disagreements, but generally a collegial atmosphere, um, which is important in terms of getting good policy done over time because you have to be
Mhm.
able to have these tough conversations.
Mm.
Um, the other big takeaway, which is not going to be a huge surprise, but it just reiterated for me how important leadership is. It's um, power is more concentrated than I expected in the House
Okay.
with the Speaker's office and some of the key committee chair people. Um, and I think it might be a little less so in the Senate, but I think in all the Senate, the House, and the governor's office, there have been stark examples of when leadership has proven effective and fruitful, and quite the opposite.
Hmm.
Um, so you can have 150 good people up there, but if leadership isn't where it should be, in my opinion, then things don't get done. And the same in the Senate, and even more importantly with the governor. You see he led very strongly on the education bill, and that happened. Some other things are just, vacant of any leadership whatsoever, and you see the effect on Vermonters. You could take homelessness. He vetoed H91, which was a good bill after years of struggling with the motel program, which no one thinks is a good long-term strategy.
Right.
It's very expensive, and it's just kind of a stopgap measure. It's not really impacting the fundamental drivers of homelessness in Vermont, but it is providing a roof over people's heads. But the H91 was, in my opinion, a good transition out of the motel program over a couple of years, and really driving support where it needed to be, down to the local capstone agencies, and providing wraparound services and whatnot,
Right.
trying to address some of the root causes. And so that got vetoed. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but
Nope, you're welcome.
that got vetoed, and there's absolutely no leadership on this issue besides closing down the motel program, right? So I'm just bringing this up as an example of two examples of leadership. The Ed bill, he was very strong, came out early, presented a plan, and drove the agenda from behind the scenes for quite a bit of the session, and that contrasts markedly with the homelessness issue. So just leadership on all levels, strong leadership's crucial.
Yeah.
It really is.
I appreciate you saying that, because that's one thing I think we often need to balance in our governmental structure is having the different branches of government each doing their own job, but you also need the strong leadership to keep the boat moving in the same direction, and that, I can imagine, is a balancing act quite often. And it's something we forget how badly we need it. Which sort of brings me to my next question is, I will admit, when I was looking at your background, and then I looked at the committee you were assigned to, so your background, like you mentioned, has a lot of environmental work in it. You were part of the Peace Corps. You've served on school boards, I believe. And then, of course, the bookstores. And you were assigned to the House Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure. For yourself personally, did you see that as a good fit based on your past experience? Was it a whole new game for you? Like, what I guess on the topic of leadership, what I'm kind of dancing around is, even for yourself, within yourself and your skill set, and as a newbie, moving forward with legislation and feeling like you have a clear path forward, which I think is kind of part of like personal leadership. Was that there, or like, what was that committee assignment like?
Yeah, no, it was good. The energy side of things I'm very interested in, and have been involved in just at the bookstore and at my house, in terms of getting solar and batteries and driving EVs, and understanding, working with Efficiency Vermont, for instance, over the years in multiple capacities. And I am very interested in energy issues, so that was a good fit. The digital infrastructure part was mostly new to me, in terms of policy and oversight. Most of that role is an oversight role, because the legislature, by its own admission, has been woefully inadequate at overseeing state IT programs, which are very expensive and have been kind of all over the map in terms of cost overruns and effectiveness and timeliness. And so the state, quite wisely, about 8 years ago, created the Agency of Digital Services to try to rationalize things across state government. That's been through four different directors in that time.
Are we back to
And
the idea of leadership there?
yeah, well, fortunately, the woman that runs the agency right now is quite competent, and worked well with us in committee. We did pass one bill to kind of upgrade the reporting of the agency to the legislature.
Mhm.
And It's a big task to kind of rationalize IT across the state government, but that's in process, and I think we've made some progress in committee to work on the oversight aspect of that, which needs to happen. It was certainly not happening, and that's a whole other topic we can get into if you'd like, of oversight of government. I think
Mhm.
is lacking. Both oversight of the departments and agencies, but also of the legislature itself.
Hmm.
Um, I just recently came back from the National Council of State Legislators annual conference in Boston, and there were a couple of interesting sessions there on this. And some states have very robust and effective oversight mechanisms and departments.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something I would like to find more about and and pursue in the coming years.
Mhm.
Um,
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
yeah, no, I mean it's just like, there's bills. We you get in this cycle of we're passing bills and then we go away. We all have jobs and other things. We come back. It's a new session or even a new biennium, and new issues, or building on top of old issues, and we're passing things, but there's very little understanding or time spent on looking at what we've passed in the
Mhm.
past, and did these bills do what we were expecting them to do? What were the unintended consequences? No matter how well a bill is crafted, there's almost always going to be unintended consequences when rubber meets the road, right? So, um, are we looking at those? Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. Are bills doing what they're supposed to do?
Mhm.
There's a lot that just gets done and then we move on, and not quite as much analysis of the efficacy of what we've done as I'd like to see.
Mm. I think you bring up a really good point, and I'm glad you did, Chris. Thank you. What it brings up for me is a few things. One, as I was prepping for the show today, I was just mulling over that idea of infrastructure and all the different types of infrastructure a system may have. You have like in a roadway, you might have the physical infrastructure of the roads and the culverts and the signage, but then you also have the additional infrastructure of like who's plowing the roads and how are those trucks being maintained and who's filling the seats and who's overseeing everything. Um, and I was thinking about Vermont in general and its infrastructure and how it feels like a lot of our systems are getting pushed on in many ways. But the other thing it brings up for me is a conversation I believe I had last week with John Walters from the Vermont Political Observer about he was specifically talking about the ethics committee at the legislature and how its rollout isn't going as smoothly as perhaps people would like or people need. And I guess my question to come out of both of those thoughts is, when you say we're lacking oversight, I think yes, I totally agree. We never perhaps take the time to analyze what the bills have done. But in your mind, is that like, do we not have the systems in place to do that? Do we not have the people in place? Do we not have the just the will to put it in place? Maybe some folks are like, "Yeah, we're doing fine. We got enough on our plates."
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do you think the first lever needs to be pulled?
Well, Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest, I think I would I would make a lot of changes to our system.
Okay.
Really, I mean, I think we're um, we're underinvesting in legislative government,
Hmm.
and I understand. We're a citizen legislature, and we have this long history of that, and to some degree, it's served us quite well over the years. Um, but sometimes, and in this case, I think it's the case that we're penny wise and pound foolish. We under um, pay the legislators. We have no staff. We have no offices. We have no expertise to pull on except for the legislative staff who are the legal staff who write the bills,
Mhm.
and then there's the fifth joint fiscal office who does do fiscal analysis for specific bills. Um, but you have a citizen legislature now trying to deal with very complex 21st century problems, and we're basically a 19th century system, and it works to some degree. It works actually better than I expect sometimes. Um, but when you're overhauling the entire state's education system, or you're dealing with health policy, which is tied into national health policy and
Mhm.
federal tax policy and insurance policy and complex health pricing systems. Um, you know, a citizen legislature that turns over every couple of years with committees of varied expertise in the subject areas, uh, maybe not the best system, you know?
Mhm.
It's a very open question in my mind. Like I'm new, so I'm trying not to be too judgmental about it. But I think it could be professionalized on multiple levels. If you created better incentives for more different types of people and more qualified people, not just we're dominated by retirees, rich people, people with spouses who have good jobs, and
Mhm.
then just people who are burning it really at both ends and very, very difficult. So there's few young people, and it's not as diverse a group of people as it should be. And I'm not just talking about racially or ethnically. I'm talking about experientially.
Mhm.
Um, and so there's a lot there that we could go into, but I know there's been some reforms attempted in the past, and this is not a new issue. But as the issues get more complex, I mean, we haven't even started talking about AI or cyber cyber issues, which are both in my committee,
Mhm.
because of the digital infrastructure part of things. Um, you know, there's complex issues to work with there, and it would be a lot. It would be a lot easier for us as legislators if we had a professional staff to be helping us. Um,
Mhm.
we rely a lot on lobbyists who are subject area experts, and that sometimes that works quite well, and other times not. But from a systemic point of view, it would make more sense to have kind of impartial, professional staff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as we're talking, I'm thinking I need to put a call out to the Vermont Historical Society and see if anyone there knows the history of why we have a citizen legislature. I admit I've never dug into that, but I would love to know the reasoning behind it. You know what I mean? Um, I can guess the emotional reasoning. The sense that we don't have people who are in it for just for the political power, I think is perhaps one of the emotional reasonings. But, what was the kind of what made it practical, or what made it the best way for Vermont to go forward at the time. Um, but yeah, I guess, for you, when you talk about professionalization, as a new lawmaker, what's there for you to get your feet under you, and navigate the systems and get yourself professionalized as much as possible?
Hmm.
Are there systems even there in place that you feel are robust enough?
Um, well, the Snelling Center did a very very nice 3-day orientation before we
Mm-hmm.
started, so that was very helpful. Once you get there, you're some of the leadership staff will help. We had someone meeting with us as freshmen, fresh people, once a week. And that was very helpful just to get oriented and understand when these bills come up, what they are, and then the procedures on the floor, and etiquette, and process, and all that sort of thing. So there are some mechanisms to get up to speed.
Mm-hmm.
My committee specifically was a new committee. Well, it was kind of a re uh, creation of an old committee.
Right.
Last biennium, the Energy Committee got folded into the Environment Committee, and that proved to be too much there. So they pulled it back out and
Mm-hmm.
merged it with digital infrastructure. So we were a new committee this biennium with five of the 9 members were freshmen, and we had a new chair, freshman chair. So we ended up doing just a lot of foundational testimony. So we didn't produce a lot of bills, but it was good because we really got the lay of the land in terms of, and there's a lot to learn in terms of, um, the utilities in the state, Velco, which runs the transmission system, ISO New England, which is the integrated New England grid, um, and how that all works together, and issues around, pricing, and alternative energies, where we actually get our energy from, Hydro-Quebec,
Mm-hmm.
all those kinds of issues. And then the Department of Public Service came in and testified a lot. Then there's the telecom side. Um, Electricity is highly regulated, but the telecom side is not, right? So you
Hmm.
have these um, frustrating gaps in cell coverage around the state, right? And which people complain about all the time, including me. And but we have very little leverage over the telecommunications companies about what they have to do. So you really see the difference between the regulated utilities like electricity, and then the unregulated areas like telecom, and what kind of leverage we have or don't have. And so anyway, there was a lot to learn, and then the whole digital infrastructure side as well. So we did it in our committee. We just did a lot of foundational learning, taking testimony and getting to know the various players in
Mm-hmm.
the state. And so we'll be well situated for this coming session to do some more robust legislation around, well, hopefully a lot of things,
Mm-hmm. Um, Thank you, thank you. Yes, as I'm grinning because I got stuck in one of those dead cell zones over the weekend and quite literally missed the boat that I was supposed to catch to meet my cousins. So yes, that's feeling rather top of the surface right now. um,
Yeah.
we need to hear from some underwriters here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. But stay tuned, folks. Representative Christopher Morrow and I shall return in a moment. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. If you're just joining us, I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Representative Chris Morrow, who represents the Windham-Windsor-Bennington district in Vermont, which are the towns of Weston, Andover, Londonderry, and Winhall. So thank you, Chris, for being here. In the first half of the show, we were talking about government oversight and what it means to kind of look at things systemically, and a little bit of your work on the House Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure. What I'd like to switch to now, in a few moments, I just remembered I have to do some housekeeping things. Um, Start thinking about the type of legislation you would like to talk about, while I remind listeners that the views and opinions of everyone on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the hosts and the guests, and no one else, not the platform, not the radio station, not anywhere you might view this. And I want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with media centers around the state. Did I forget anything, Chris?
Sounds good to me. Yes.
Um, so, talk to me a little bit. What was the legislation um, from this past session that maybe didn't receive some of the press time or public attention as some of the big ones like H91 or the Ed Bill that you feel you'd like to touch on so people know about them?
Yeah, well, my favorite bill that came out of the session was the phone-free schools bill, which passed on the last day after a very circuitous route. Um, but the data on cell phone use in kids and schools is pretty overwhelming in terms of kids' mental health, their ability to concentrate, their social skills with fellow students. I mean, on multiple levels, there's prolific data on this, and so we were happy to be one of many states that passed similar legislation this year to restrict phone use from bell to bell, so that not only in the classroom, but between classes and at lunch and recess and all those kinds of times, the kids are interacting with each other instead of hiding in their phones and being exposed to the destructive algorithms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think long term, if you look back 10 years from now, that's probably going to be the most consequential bill that we passed this last session. Along with that, we passed a bill called the Kids Code Bill, which restricted social media companies in their access to children and what they can feed children. So it's really the same issue, just a different bill. And they're both extremely important for kids, especially.
Yes.
So those were two great bills, and I was just very tangentially involved in those. That was mostly other people. And a note, like this is a good example, actually. The phone-free schools bill was really pushed by a few mothers from around the state. This did not originate in the House. I mean, there are some legislators who are champions, obviously, who took it on. But this isn't a good example of how a few Vermonters can get a bill passed in the state when they're tenacious and the data is behind them and they have a good voice, and they have allies, develop allies. It was really an interesting bill to watch from that point of view, because it was driven more by a few mothers in the state than it was by legislators. And so it was impressive for me as a freshman to watch that happen, because it was real democracy in action. Yeah. Some of the other bills, we passed two good healthcare bills. I mean, you get quickly you get in the weeds on these things, and if you're not up on them it doesn't make sense. One was a pharmaceutical bill, this so-called 430B program, which um, regulates how hospitals and healthcare centers can price
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceuticals, basically. And so some of the hospitals were not happy with that, but most of the smaller hospitals and the federally qualified health centers and others were very happy that we passed that. And it will certainly over time help rationalize healthcare costs in the state, because you saw a wide disparity of charges pricing on these drugs, and sometimes quite exorbitant. And the other healthcare bill had to do with the Green Mountain Care Board and how they oversee hospitals and their pricing and their structures. Again, quickly gets into arcane lands, and it's healthcare policy is very difficult. It's really, I feel for that that committee, because it's very complicated, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't have nearly the same leverage we do over something like education, which we can and did overhaul the whole system. There's no way we could do anything like that for the healthcare system, even though it needs it, but that it needs to happen at a federal level.
Yeah.
So we will certainly be dealing with healthcare issues again this upcoming session, because we need to. Really, for my money, the healthcare crisis in Vermont was more of a crisis than the education crisis. The education bill and everything was really, obviously, as you know, driven by the hue and cry over property tax
Yeah.
increases, which is completely legitimate. But more manageable, in my view, than the healthcare crisis. And we have multiple hospitals around the state teetering
Mm-hmm.
on the brink of insolvency. We only have two health insurers. One was also flirting with insolvency.
Yeah.
We have some of the highest health insurance costs in the nation, and there's some very serious problems with our healthcare system. And so these two bills were, I think, quite good and helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but we have work to do, for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
um, and And what else? Of course, the Ed bill, which was a whole beast in and of itself. And
Yeah. What are your
you
thoughts on the Ed bill? I realize it has a long ways to go before things become implemented, but as it stands now, what are your thoughts?
um, I think if you zoom out to the basic structural issues of what we did, creating the foundation formulas, so that instead of local budgets being created and being sent to Montpelier for us to tax everyone and then send the money back out, there's going to be the state is going to set the per pupil dollar amount,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to follow the students. And this is the way it's done in 48 other states around the nation. It's
Yeah.
not a revolutionary idea. It does help rationalize things across the state. It does help the equity issue. This is one area that I was not well informed about, is despite Act 60 and what we've done over the last few decades since the Brigham decision, actually equity of education has not improved that much. In fact, in some areas, it's been quite poor.
Mm-hmm.
So, I came into this whole debate thinking about it from a fiscal point of view, but then there's this equity point of view. This equity issue is a very valid one. The old system, there were disincentives. People thought that if they voted down their local school budget, that their property taxes would go down. But it's because of how convoluted and the system is, and that's not really the case because everything gets rolled up to the state, um, and then you have the common level of appraisals over it's the system was ready for reform,
Mm-hmm.
and there people should be able to understand it, without spending hours and hours going into the details of this. And But it was hard. There's very legitimate gripes with this bill. The loss of local control is a legitimate issue. Um, and in some areas of the state will be much more of an issue than others because schools, especially small rural schools, perform more of a function than just educating our kids, right?
So true.
They're the hub of the community in a lot of ways. So how do you price that into a bill like this? It's difficult. Um, um, and then the whole issue of independent schools, for me, the amount of time and energy and angst spent on that issue was way overblown. Um,
Interesting.
and compared, there's maybe 5% of our students are in independent schools in the state. And I'd say it dominated like 80% of the discussion. Um, I understand the public school advocates for sure, but I think the angst over this was overblown. And people that don't live in a district where there are independent schools who operate seamlessly with the public schools. My kids went from Floodbrook to Burton, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a seamless transition from a public school to an independent school. My younger daughter went from Floodbrook, spent 2 years at Long Trail, which is an independent school in Dorset, because of her needs and in the middle school years, and then went to Burton. We had, so we have options, and it serves our kids very well. We don't have a historic high school, so we didn't really have an option there. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that Burton functions as our high school. Um, but anyway, so for me, I thought that was overblown. And then the Senate, the dynamics of the Senate didn't help the issue because uh, there were some very strong-minded independent school advocates on the Senate Conference Committee, especially that skewed the conversation at the end of the session. I voted against the bill coming out of the House, going initially, because I didn't feel it gave enough flexibility to independent schools, and took into consideration rural schools as much because they had some pretty strict class size minimums and
Right.
some other elements of it which I felt would be difficult for districts like mine. Um, so and then those got loosened up a bit in conference committee, and so I ended up. Even though we didn't have a roll call for the actual bill, as you know, because of some confusion at the end there,
Mm-hmm.
it had changed just enough in committee for me to support the bill.
Okay.
Um, Although, with misgivings.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's the tax policy side of the bill too, which doesn't get talked about as much, but I think. Like now we get taxed on a homestead rate or a non-homestead rate. And so the non-homestead got split up into a few subcategories to allow more flexibility going forward. I thought that makes sense. And then also the income sensitivity system for how we assess property taxes on our homesteads got changed to a more immediate and hopefully more effective system.
Mm.
So it would basically take the first $450,000 value of your homestead, and you get sensitivity of that based on your income. So there would be two kind of levels, but it would all happen in the same year instead of being retroactive the way it is now.
Oh, okay.
And you'd
Interesting.
be able to know in advance, like, okay, this is what is going to happen, and this will be the impact on my taxes.
Hmm.
Um, so there was a lot in this bill, and as you say, we did even cover special education, um, technical education,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
money for building or renovating schools. Is a huge backlog of, I think it's $6 billion or something
I wouldn't
estimated
be surprised. Yeah.
of construction costs for bringing schools either up to code or building new ones.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a lot to deal with in this upcoming session, not to mention what's happening now, which is the redistricting task force, which is meeting to come up with 3 maps that of the new districts. So now we have 119 districts and supervisory unions. The governor presented a proposal at the beginning of last session for 5. Um,
Hmm.
there were various proposals during the session. I think it's going to shake out maybe between 15 and 20, somewhere in that neighborhood. But whether they're all going to be districts, whether there'll be some supervisory unions or not, what the boundaries will be is all being worked on now. And we'll vote on that in January. And
Mm.
that could, depending on what happens there, it could scuttle the whole thing, really. Um, and which some people want to happen. A lot
Yeah.
of people want to happen. So it'll be interesting dynamics right at the start of the session. Usually the dynamics, the fireworks come at the end, but there'll be some interesting early session dynamics around the ed policies.
Mm. Yes. I encourage people to I know it's so easy to be like, okay, we're out of session, so we can shut that part of our brain off. But yes, I would encourage people to keep an eye on the ed bill and the redistricting,
Hmm.
because
Absolutely.
that I think the redistricting, and I'm not arguing for it or against it. It's just it's one of those places where the rubber will be meeting the road,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
and things will be real at that point.
Right,
Yeah.
right. None of the other things that are in the bill can happen until we pick a district map system. So that they're charged with coming up with 3 options for us to vote on. And
Hmm.
obviously the 3 options will have different implications, and we can mix and match. And I guess it would be go right to the ed committee and then to the whole house to vote on. Um,
Hmm.
So it was an interesting session to be a freshman. We stayed 2 weeks late, and then we came back again. And so you talk to the old timers who've been around for dozens of years, and they're all like, "That was the weirdest session we've ever had." So it was kind of an interesting way to start.
Well, I have to agree with you because, just in my life as a reporter, I think the COVID at up to my experience, the COVID session was so weird, but it was more weird as far as like how are we going to make this work in isolation? A communal process work when we're supposed to be isolated. And confusion over money. But this was really, yeah, the policy really seemed to be driving what what was different, if that makes a sense, if that makes sense, at least from
Hmm.
someone on the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely.
um
Um,
oh, go ahead.
well, there was just one other bill, which is the housing bill.
Oh,
Housing
right, yes.
housing obviously is continues to be a huge issue, really a systemic issue. One of the other observations I had about the legislature and government in general is that it's all very siloed. So you
Mm,
have the committees are all subject area committees. The agencies and departments are subject to area departments, and And but that's not really the way the world works. We live in everything is interconnected and interdependent, and I think the organizations that function well in the world have more of an ecological lens or systemic lens on how things work together, and there's a cross fertilization of different departments and ideas, and so that doesn't happen as much in the legislature as I would like, and I'm going to work on some of that in the coming years, hopefully. But I bring that up because housing specifically is one of these issues that affects so much, education, healthcare, business, it really affects so much of what we do in the state, and some of the prevailing issues that are facing us as Vermonters, and it's a fundamental issue. So the housing bill we passed was good, but we need to do a lot more. It was there was kind of complicated tax increment financing program called CHIP, which is being developed now, which will work well for medium-sized Vermont towns, medium and larger, who have the capacity, who have town managers, or who have people that have really the capacity to get into a somewhat sophisticated debt structure. You're basically borrowing against future grand list increases.
Right.
To build infrastructure tied to building housing. So it makes sense. I think it'll work well in certain instances. It's not a panacea for Vermont housing, especially in the smaller towns. The Act 250 reforms of the last biennium were also helpful to a certain extent with the housing, but again, the small towns like my towns were not in on that. If you don't already have public water and sewer, you're not really in on any of those bills. And so, not that Weston wants to build a 20 unit housing development downtown, but we do need small housing units built all through the state, and so I'm hopeful that in this coming session we can pass a housing bill that addresses some of the smaller, more rural towns in Vermont, and just further loosens up some of the burdensome regulation around permitting housing projects. Which it's still, despite the improvements made in the last few years, it's still an issue. And because housing is so crucial and such a fundamental right, if we want young people to stay here and build businesses and raise families to fill our schools, they need to have a place to live. So I think we've covered most of the major bills that came out of the session.
Mm-hmm. I'll just, to your point of the smaller towns, that has been one of the concerns I've had watching some of these housing bills and Act 250 reform bills, because it did feel a little bit like our smaller municipalities, like 1,000 people and less, were maybe not being considered in the same way, or the impacts on them weren't being considered. But also to that point, it is nice to hear. I was just speaking with Alex and Camille over at the Addison Regional Planning Commission, and they were like, okay, how can we provide that capacity for, like, if a small town wants to take on a CHIP project, like how as we of the planning commission do that. And so hopefully,
glad to hear that.
And I'm sorry, not the planning commission, the economic development commission, regional economic development corporation. We only have less than 5 minutes, but I would like to touch on quickly, Chris. One of the big uncertainties hurled at the legislature this session is just some of the unpredictability happening at the federal level, especially around funding. Um, did that play out for you in your committee work at all, or is that something you're keeping an eye on? What are you sitting with around, how we work with our federal partners at this point?
Yeah, I mean, in our committee, it came up to the extent that the government canceled a program called the American Connectivity Program, which helps subsidize broadband and cell service for low income Vermonters. And we'll be working on some bills to address that in this upcoming session. But there's nothing compared to what's happened since the
Mm,
session ended. Honestly, we're facing an all-out war on poor people now, poor and middle income even. And there are three elements to it. One is the SNAP, the food assistance in Vermont. And there's a lot of Vermonters, 60,000 plus Vermonters are on SNAP
mhm,
or the child version of that. Um, and then you have LIHEAP, which is the heating assistance for low income Vermonters, many or most of whom are elderly. And with volatile oil prices and gas prices, it's a huge issue. And then in the coming years, the cuts on Medicaid. So you have
mhm.
a three-tiered attack on low and middle income Vermonters. And so in some cases, you'll have people who participate in all three of those programs. Um,
Yeah.
and and the numbers are just so large in terms of dollar amounts that the state is not going to be able to fill the gap. We're
Hmm.
talking hundreds of millions of dollars per year. And so this is going to, I think, dominate the budget conversation for the next few years for sure. We're coming from an era where we had lots of COVID money, ARPA money, and there were tens of millions of dollars going every which way. And now we're going into fiscal austerity like we haven't seen for quite a while. At the same time that we're having growing demand, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the numbers, more and more people going to the food shelf. Um, the homeless population is increasing. You look at most of the social indicators and they're not going in the right direction. It's going to be a difficult few years. We're going to have less money. There's more stress on people, and so we have a lot of work to do.
Hmm.
And this can't be just a government thing. It's all our social service agencies and just us as human beings need to be helping our neighbors and working in our towns. And this is going to be an all hands on deck situation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Um, I was speaking with someone at a housing trust recently, and they pointed out that because we are coming out of the ARPA um, funding, COVID funding, years, that some of the impacts of what's happening at the federal level might feel um, we we may not feel them right away because there's still some ARPA projects in works. There's still some funding from that kind of carrying a wave through. But once that money is gone, he personally was like, I don't know how I'm going to build any more housing, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, the
And
housing agency's got lots of money from the ARPA and COVID money. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So it's we're quickly moving into a different fiscal environment.
mhm. Yeah, we might not
Um,
feel it today, but we will definitely feel it.
yeah. Well, even last session we had requests over we had $300 million of requests over what we could fund.
Wow.
And so that's what the appropriations committee spends most of their time doing is figuring out what the true priorities are. Um, and so, yeah, that number is gonna be a lot worse moving forward. That's a hard
Yay,
job. The Appropriations Committee is another hard, you
very
know,
much so.
they, yeah, they do a really good job, very dedicated, bipartisan for the most part. Um,
Hmm.
Vermont's one of the few states that isn't statutorily required to balance our budget, but we do
Mm,
invariably every year, and that's largely due to the work on the Appropriations Committee.
hmm.
So it's a non-sexy but underappreciated part of the legislature.
I find that most of the really important pieces of the legislature are usually the parts that your eyes start glassing over, really quickly
Yeah.
when people talk about them, unfortunately. We are out of time, Chris, but what would you like to leave listeners with before we head out?
Oh, well, it's just we live in a great state, and it's an honor to be a representative from my district to the legislature. I'm learning a lot and hopefully providing some value. But the best thing about Vermont is we care about each other, and we're going to need to tap into that wellspring of care in the coming years. So let's all lean into that together.
Thank you, Representative Chris Morrow. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just go to my legislative email, or I have my other email is Morrow4VT, MORROWFORVT at gmail.com. Feel free to send me an email.
Fantastic. Thank you. And of course, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW LP Brattleboro every Friday at 2, rebroadcasted on Wednesday morning, and wherever you find your podcasts. Take care, everybody, and have a good weekend.